makes us so unique?
What makes us so unique as human beings is that we're divine. We're perfect as we are.
In this fast-paced world that we are living in today, how often do we stop to appreciate the beauty that surrounds us? How often do we acknowledge the magnificence that exists in each and every one of us?
Well, I think that what makes us so unique as human beings is not the fact that we have opposing thumbs, or that we stand on 2 feet, or that our eyes point straight ahead, or that we have little body hair, or even that we have big brains, because elephants have bigger brains than us. What makes us so unique is the size of the forebrain, or the frontal lobe, in comparison to the rest of the brain.
The frontal lobe is the part of the brain that creates and dreams and sets goals for our future. And to think that back in the 1930s, through prefrontal lobotomy, we were actually destroying this part of the brain by severing the connections in the prefrontal cortex. We were actually interfering with an intelligence far beyond what we are just beginning to comprehend.
There's 50 trillion cells, give or take a few trillion in the body, and they all have to work together as a team. And it's really, that's what makes a person and not just a collection of individual cells, is the communication paradigm of pulling all the different kinds of cells together so that all of their different functions contribute to each other and make a living organism.
Every cell in our body has its own respiratory system, digestive system, immune system.
Every cell in our body is brand new at least every year. Some cells much faster than that. Like, for instance, our digestive lining is replaced every 3 days because it's a pretty high-stress environment. And, you know, when I think about that, I think that's pretty miraculous.
We are a universe in ourselves, okay? We have these 50 trillion cells that each have a consciousness. We also have good and bad bacteria. It's a whole universe. You've got different armies of all sorts of things going on in there.
When we look beyond the external structures of our body and into its internal operating systems, it's fascinating what we learn. To think that our brain is firing off 100 trillion messages every second. You know, to walk, something that we just kind of take for granted, requires messages to be sent from our brain down to approximately 200 skeletal muscles in our legs. Now, we didn't have these neurological connections when we were born. This is something that we had to learn.
Now I want to tell you something about a human body. And that is this: we see ourselves as a single individual entity, but that's a misperception. That's not true. You, me, we are communities. The living entities are called cells. Inside my body are 50 trillion cells. They're the living entities. When I say me, it's not a single entity, I'm talking about a community.
When we observe the communication of cells in a controlled environment, we see that they have the ability to respond and interact with external stimuli. So this shows us the importance between the relationship of the mind and the environment.
The brain is the regulator that adds and takes out factors to the blood and changes the composition, and the composition of the culture medium affects the fate of the cells. And then I say, yeah, but what causes the brain to release different chemicals? And the answer is perception, mind, belief.
We are both human and heavenly. We're both self and soul, you know, simultaneously. And it's only our perception, our belief, our experience that differentiates between heaven and hell, paradise and poverty.
Positive and negative are one of the same things on a continuum of different extremes. Now, in the middle of these extremes is where life is just life, until we attach meaning to it. And the meaning that we attach is an extension of our intuition and our perception of the world. Now, how we perceive the world is in direct correlation to what we have learnt pre-birth throughout our childhood up until now.
You have a child in a schoolyard, and all the children are playing in the playground. And you're sitting there on a bench, and your child's on the swing, and the child falls off the swing, and then there's a moment of like, it finds itself on the ground, totally confused. The first thing it will do is look at the parents. If the parent is like this, the child realizes something is wrong, and then the child will begin to cry and be upset by this experience. In contrast, if the child falls off the swing, looks at the parent, and the parent goes, "That's okay, get up, dust yourself off, and let's get on with the game," the child will get up and everything will be fine.
Some people are very good at presenting us with opportunities and experiences to grow. Some people are very good at doing the opposite. Experiences and opportunities and invitations to perhaps believe things about ourselves that might actually not be accurate, or that actually might be somebody else's belief.
Who we believe we are is dictated by all the things that we were told about ourselves and where we fit into the world up until about the age of 7 or 8. After that, most of our learning about us is completed.
We are programmed. And the issue is, sometimes we're programmed correctly to make the right response, but sometimes we're programmed to make an incorrect response. And that's where the problems in our world come from, because if we have a misperception, a misunderstanding of the world, and make an inappropriate response, then we're out of harmony with the world.
From birth to around 2 years of age, a child's brainwave state is in delta. Now, this is a state of pure observation and download of sensory information. From 2 till 6, it jumps up again to theta, and this is the land of fantasy, the land of imagination. And so what's important to know here is that as teachers, as parents, as role models in society, this is a highly hypnotic state. The first 6 years is a highly hypnotic state. So the question is, what are the programs that we are embedding? What are the belief structures, particularly through our throwaway comments, that are being created about the identity of self? Now, as adults now, the answers in terms of our belief structures, if we were to look back over our childhood, the answers are encoded in our upbringing.
Well, I mean, my father was an alcoholic. My mother was, someone who had a lot of issues with being bipolar, manic depressive. And so, we came from a Catholic family, and conversation wasn't something our family had, and the conversation, what we knew was conversation, was conflict. That's how we learned to communicate, was through conflict.
I came from a very talented bunch of brothers and sisters. We were all into music. We started to do a lot of singing competitions, past the point to where it was enjoyable. And sometimes I can experience, I experienced encounters of getting beaten right before going on stage, and somewhere in there I got very mixed up with the I have to win in order to feel like somebody, and singing no longer became that peaceful place to where I could just go and let go of everything.
All of that was just massive conflict, and not really having any idea of how to resolve the thoughts and feelings that I had about myself and about the world, and how my lack of inability to really relate to people. And finally I realized, something isn't working here, and that's when the sweat lodge came. And so from the sweat lodge is when everything began to change. And that's when I really started going inward to find out, why was I in so much pain? What was this thing about, life and all of that? And that's when, that journey began.
We're growing up in a high-stress environment with very little education on how to manage that stress response. And because of our evolved neocortex, our language, our intelligence, we're experiencing not just the likes of stress from external triggers, so like a car pulling out in front of us, but more frequently we're experiencing the triggers of internal stress. So the memory of a past experience, or the anticipation of an upcoming event.
So because we have the ability as human beings to make thought more real than anything else, we can begin to become so obsessed about an idea, a thought, a future event, or a past event, that we can become so intentional on it that we literally make that thought real. And the moment that happens, the thought becomes the experience. And once the thought becomes the experience, the end product of that experience is called an emotion. So we condition the body to memorize states of mind that ultimately become conditioned in the body. And when the body becomes the mind, that's a habit.
Nature designed the protection response, if we go back historically, to save an individual, let's say to run away from a saber-toothed tiger. And once that individual runs away from the saber-toothed tiger, then the protection response recedes, and then the individual's back in growth. That is the nature of a protection response. It's only supposed to be used in an acute moment for a short moment and then eliminate and get back into growth. Unfortunately, the world that we live in is programmed with fears and threats, and that we as a population today are living more 24/7, 365 with constant fears threatening our survival. Will I be able to keep this job? Will I be able to provide insurance? Will I have enough money to pay for this? With each one of these things, in some sense, acting as a threat for our survival.
Because an animal in nature who's being threatened by some stimulus in the environment that's unknown is going to run from that unknown. So we tend to fear the unknown. We tend to run from an opportunity. We tend to run from adventure because that's what happens when we're living in survival.
Significance is growth is the opportunity to maintain the body, keep it running, service it, and take care of the thing to keep it healthy. But when you're in a protection response, you shut off the growth mechanisms because growth and protection can't occur at the same time.
So how can we ever then embrace our dreams if we're being run by chemicals that are forcing us to return back to the familiar and run away from the unfamiliar?
In the old days, protection response, I run away from the tiger, cool, I'm back in growth. Today, we run and run and run and never get away from the threats. And as a result, we are in a continuous process secreting stress hormones into the system whose function is to shut down the growth mechanisms and shut down the immune system. And you say, why would stress want to shut down the growth functions in the immune system? And the answer is very simple. It's just logic economy. If I need to run from a tiger, I need all the energy I can to run from a tiger. I have a bacterial infection and a tiger is chasing me. My brain does a calculation and says, how much money should I put into fighting the infection? And how much money should I put into running away from the tiger? And the answer is, throw all of your energy into running away from the tiger, because if you don't, the bacterial infection's irrelevant.
When you have a period of time where your endocrine system is not getting its share of, it's not doing its job, we end up with autoimmune diseases. And many of those are sort of new diseases. You didn't hear of lupus or chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia 20 or 30 years ago. And these are things that often are the result of people putting themselves under stress or allowing stresses to affect them.
Worry is a big stress on the body, and that's what's really been something in my life. Bladder and urinary tract infections. So I wish I knew then what I know now. However, I'm so glad to have had some of these experiences. To get out of it, I think a lot of it is, I know a lot of it is choosing it. Choosing to wake up in the morning and say, hey, what am I choosing today? I could choose to be sad, I could choose to be stressed, or I could choose to have some fun and be joyous.
There are two kinds of stress. One is called eustress, EU stress, and the other is called distress. And the body has totally two different responses to these stresses. And here's what the difference is. Eustress means good stress. This is the kind of stress like an athlete is out on playing a tennis game, or a football player playing a football game. They're out in the field, they're pushing their physiological bodies and putting stress on the system. But why is this a good stress called a eustress versus something called a distress? And the answer is this. Distress is a stress that threatens your survival. Eustress is a stress that just pushes your physiological limits. So if you're playing the game and you're not a gladiator so that if you lose the game you're going to die, that would have distress involved. Eustress is a sports game. Why? I'm out there pushing my physiology, but not at the threat of my survival. So that releases a whole different chemical milieu within the body that controls the cells in a different way. It encourages their growth and maintenance and builds the muscles and builds the system to deal with that kind of stress. So
when we are stressed, it's what happens in the heart goes into incoherent rhythm. It means it's a kind of chaotic things. When you have a biofeedback system that measures your heart rhythm, you see kind of very wavy, shaky waves, in fact, completely disturbed. So it means your heart is like the orchestra playing completely wrong tune. And when you are in relax well, in fact, your heart rhythm makes really nice waves, very what we call coherent waves. So it's not only the waves, it means all your physiology goes into coherence. It's like everything is in tune, works well, and you can measure that very easily.
Stress isn't the actual issue, it's the recovery phase that we're not doing that's the issue. And if we think about it, animals do this instinctively. You think about a dog that gets the sense of a rabbit, you know, the smell of a predator fires off that fight-flight response and it's off for the chase. And at the end of the chase you will see it stop and it's going into that recovery phase where you will see it panting, it slows down its breathing and it rests. Now, as human beings, because of our conditioning and our interaction with our fast-paced environment, we don't stop. And as a result, we are continuously releasing a little bit more cortisol and a little bit more adrenaline into the system. And over time, this shows up in the body. When all we need to do is to remember to stop. Focus on our breathing, bring it into our awareness, and slow it down.
Now, when a baby is in the womb and under stress before birth, one thing that we measure is their heart rate, what we call beat-to-beat variability. And that is the most accurate sign that this baby is distressed and needs to be helped. Exactly the same in an adult, that it's our heartbeats that tell us how anxious we are.
Usually, most people breathe at 10, 12 breaths per minute. It's considered normal by conventional medicine, but it's normal, but it means it's a normal, chronic, low level of stress. In fact, if you want to go in coherence, in a really relaxed level, you need to go down between 4 and 6 breaths per minute.
The coherence that's created in the brain sends a coherent signal down the central nervous system, which then sends a signal to all other systems in the body, and that coherent signal starts self-organizing or reorganizing, and then the person starts to have their immune system bounce back, their vision to improve, their digestive system to change, and they start feeling a greater sense of well-being.
When we don't stop and give our body a chance to reorganize itself and continue to maintain a stressful state, we continue to divert blood from the stomach into the larger muscle groups. Now, over time, we may hear our body trying to talk to us, you know, like, have you ever been worried to the point where you felt sick to the stomach? This is a message from our body to review how we are being.
It's believed that as many as 70% of the Western population has some form of leaky gut. The cause of that is often antibiotics, certain prescription medicines, anti-inflammatories, contraceptive pill, processed foods in our diet. Stress is a major contributing factor to that. What happens in that situation is that we eat our food, and tiny little wee particles of our food then are able to penetrate through the wall of an unhealthy gut, which creates an inflammatory response throughout the body. Now, 80% of diseases come from some form of inflammation in the body.
One of the very interesting facts about our body is that we have many more bacteria in us than cells, and we have sort of many trillions of cells. Now, most of those bacteria live in our bowel, in the crevices of the bowel. In fact, you know, I think we have about 40 trillion bacteria within us. In fact, we are a composite of cells and bacteria. And the other interesting theory is that the very mitochondria in our cells, every child learns about mitochondria in the cells, may have evolved from bacteria. In other words, you know, these are things that we're trying to kill, but are actually intrinsic part of it as well.
There's a thing called opportunistic organisms in the medical community. And what this means is this: I can take a blood sample from myself, from anybody, and show you with a blood sample, every one of us is infected with all the basic bacteria, viruses, and parasites that humans have. And you say, but look, I don't feel like I'm infected, I'm pretty healthy. And the answer is, as long as my immune system is working up to its potential, then we suppress the opportunistic organisms. If the immune system becomes compromised, then the opportunistic organisms take over. Well, this, when you think about it, then this is why stress and illness are always connected. At school, when exam periods come up, that's when the students get sick. Why? Because when they get stressed of the exams that are determining their future and their lives, they're releasing stress hormones, which then shuts off their immune system. Now they're ready to get sick.
And what happens is that when the body gets out of balance, we get a high amount of bad bacteria and bad fungus growing, and the good stuff that supports our immune system, that supports our health, mentally, emotionally, physically and spiritually, is suppressed.
I mean, one of the areas that we as doctors have sort of, I suppose, the areas of prescribing that we've been involved in a huge way, and certainly in general practice, is the use of antibiotics. And there's no doubt that the use of antibiotics is important in many cases. Tonsillitis, for instance, if we know it's a particular bacteria, then we know that's terribly important to use that. And also, if we have a case of meningitis, it will save lives, and if we have a case of pneumonia, it's important. However, for the vast majority of people that we're seeing, people are having virus infections, and in fact, taking an antibiotic is of no use at all. In fact, in England now, with sinusitis, it is not recommended to start with antibiotics, and that's still been in many places around the world, even in ear infections in children, antibiotics aren't used.
Do you know what's in an antibiotic? Do you know what's in immunisations? Do you actually know what you're putting into your body? Antibiotics were created to assist the immune system, and yet one of the side effects is that they kill off the good bacteria that encourages the growth of the immune system. The best way that we can strengthen the immune system is through things that we already know, like having a good night's sleep, eating living, unprocessed foods, getting outside and getting fresh air. And in particular for our children, letting them eat the dirt, kiss the dog, come inside and not have to always wash their hands before they eat, not cleaning every surface with an antibacterial cleaner because bugs are good. If we can allow our children to strengthen their own immune system, then they're more likely to be able to have their immune system carry them through the healing phase when they do get sick.
The sorts of things that will happen during this healing phase can be the obvious sweating or crying's a good one. We might go to the toilet an awful lot more. That really is the body's way of getting rid of the stuff that it no longer needs. But here's the interesting thing about this healing phase. There is a point during that healing phase, usually about halfway through, when the symptoms that we had when we were still in conflict are either the same as or greater than they were in the first place. And so it'll spike, the symptoms will be the worst they've ever been, you'll probably have your worst night ever, and you'll think, oh my goodness, I thought I was over it. But then sure enough, within 12 to 24 hours, that spike will drop, and you'll be back on the healing path. But guess what? Most people actually either reach for the medicine cabinet or go to the doctors in the middle of this healing phase.
Through our over-prescribing, we are getting resistance of the bacteria that we really can do less and less about. And on top of that, we have many strains that are resistant. And so many hospitals are in a state of upheaval because of the bacteria that are there that are actually resistant to all sorts of medication as well. So we've learnt that actually this sort of overuse of antibiotics has actually got us into trouble. And in fact is based on a misunderstanding of ourselves, that in fact, we are here in harmony with nature.
We can resist the temptation to go perhaps for medication or to go and see the doctor, allow ourselves perhaps another 12 or 24 hours to allow things to settle. Because I don't know about you, but if you've ever had a cold, the cold has never lasted. It's always gone. And it always will. It's a question of whether or not we interfere with it by taking some, for example, pharmaceuticals and putting more emphasis on the immune system to try and sort it, or we trust the body's natural healing rhythms, natural healing process, and our own internal pharmacy.
We are our own chemists, and through self-education, we can learn how to heal the mind. We can learn how to heal the body. We can learn how to heal past trauma, and through learning how to use our own natural chemicals, most importantly, we can learn how to self-care.
Let's suppose a person is forecasting or expecting an event to happen based on some trauma that's happened in the past. As they begin to anticipate the event, as they begin to expect it, as they begin to get ready for it, as they begin to think about that future event, they begin to release the chemicals that prepare their body for the event ahead of the actual event. Now, when we begin to anticipate events and we get it right, we pat ourselves on the shoulder and we say, you see how smart I am? You need to hang out with me. I know all the answers. But what happens when we don't get it right? And when we don't get it right, that's called anxiety, that's called insomnia, that's called obsessive compulsive disorders, because the brain begins to race into the future. And that racing process over time literally puts the memory in the body, and it now sits in a subconscious program separate from the conscious mind.
If you're experiencing anxiety, that's a symptom that something's wrong. You need to change something. Now, it might be something you can address by learning new life skills, and that you can learn some techniques in various and sundry ways of managing your life better and getting over the anxiety. But the anxiety triggers you to the awareness that you've got an emotional holding pattern that needs to be addressed.
Taking a pill does not address the underlying emotional patterns. All it is doing is putting a plaster over a wound that will continue to fester. A few years back now, I was strangled to the point where I couldn't breathe, and for 2 weeks I couldn't swallow liquids, I couldn't eat foods, and eventually the emotions that arose from that were significant and they needed to be addressed. Taking medication addresses the symptoms. It does not address the underlying root cause.
I have one anxiety client that I'm working with now. She's made a lot of progress, but part of her anxiety started when she was run over by a car as a pedestrian that was running 100 kilometers an hour. And she lived through it, which is a miracle in and of itself, but she cannot count the number of bones that were broken or the number of internal organs that were damaged. And she woke up anxious out of that. Now, the doctors did a miraculous job of patching her up, but there was still more healing to do. And even a couple of years after the accident, she still had scars that were angry and red and not healing, and aches and pains in so many different areas of her body, and other organs that still really weren't functioning well. And so her metabolism was off and her immune system was off. And her anxiety was a symptom that she needed help.
So how do we get help? If our bodies are so infinitely intelligent that we can self-heal, then why are there so many medications and a pill for every symptom? Our mind is brilliant. In fact, so much of the health and disease that we experience in life is directly linked to the perceptions that we hold in our mind. So are we really educated enough about the medications that we're using? I wonder what would happen if we understood the keys to wellness rather than the cure to illness.
It's important to understand that we do not have mental illness, but rather that we do mental illness. It is an internal process of our thinking and feeling that creates the states of the likes of depression and anxiety, or the other 300 labels of mental illness according to the DSM.
I find it very interesting that there are so many medications for so many so-called psychological disorders, and yet there are no definitive tests for it. There are no blood tests, there are no chemical imbalance tests, there's no x-ray, there's no biopsy. All that happens is someone sits down and talks to someone and then they decide what medication to give.
If you have a problem with your heart, you go to the doctor and you get a heart scan. You have a problem with your gallbladder, you go to the doctor and they do an ultrasound and scan your gallbladder to determine what's happening with it. Most people have a problem with anxiety or depression or psychosis, and they go to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, try this, and let's see how it works. So we're doing guesswork about the brain, and then the person says, well, I've lost my libido, I'm suicidal, and, my hair's falling out. Well, okay, we'll try something else, or take more.
The number of pharmaceutical drugs is up in the hundreds of thousands. So, I question, is the focus really on research and wellness? If we know that lifestyle is the cause of illness, then shouldn't we be doing things like shutting down the fast food outlets and focusing on educating wellness rather than medicating illness?
In the United States, the medical profession is the leading cause of death. Statistics. It's called iatrogenic illness. I go to the doctor with complaint A, get treated, and then die from problem B. And I'm dying from the treatment. 300,000 people a year die from prescription drugs. If we had that many people die from illegal drugs, they'd have police on every corner looking for those illegal drugs. 300,000 people die from a commercial prescription drug, and we call that the cost of doing medicine. I think that cost is so far excessive, and it's actually inhuman and morally reprehensible.
Well, you know, at a surface level, we may question, well, what's wrong with taking an antidepressant like Prozac? You know, all these SSRI drugs are doing is blocking off the natural reuptake of serotonin so that it stays in the synapse longer. But that is a very simplistic understanding of what these drugs do and the complexity of our biology.
The SSRI drugs have no more effectiveness in a chemical laboratory test than a sugar pill. And then you say, well, wait a minute. How can a drug like Prozac, which apparently has no more effect than a sugar pill, be one of the biggest selling drugs in the world today and people swear by it? And the answer, which I just love, because it's one heck of a placebo. And I say, what do you mean by that? And I say, when I say a placebo drug, people say, oh, I'll give you a sugar pill, and you'll pretend it's a drug, and you'll take the sugar pill and your belief will heal you, and that's responsible for 1/3 of all healings in the medical realm. That's an established fact. The drug, the therapy, the surgery, 1/3 of all healings strictly due to the belief system, okay? So I give you a sugar pill and now your belief system is going to heal 1/3 of the people. But Prozac does better than 1/3. You say, well, how can it do that? And the answer is because it has side effects. When you take a sugar pill, it just disappears and you're only living with the belief of taking the pill. When you take Prozac, you get a side effect, a physiological feeling in your body. Things are changing, tingly, things aren't working just right. That to the placebo is a rocket booster. Not that I just take a pill, I know it's working, I feel it working, and boom, the placebo effect is amped up. So that all the great healing that comes from these drugs is just an enhanced placebo effect. And that is scientifically established.
The good thing about pharmaceutical drugs is they have side effects, so therefore once you have a side effect, then we have a pill for that too. And we can increase your usage of our products as long as you stay on them. And so I'm thinking that we shouldn't go there too soon.
Our conventional medical model says, well, the body is a biochemical machine. So leave the cells in a very bad environment, but if I change the chemicals in the body, then the body will withstand the bad environment. Very simplistic and very incorrect. Because the body is an entanglement of chemistry that is not a simple A goes to B, goes to C, and if B is wrong, you replace B and you fix it. That's the way we operate. It turns out A connects to B, to C, to D, E, F, and G, and all of a sudden, there's nothing linear. Everything is entangled. When you try to throw a chemical in an entangled mess, you affect maybe what you were looking for, but you also affect a lot of other things you weren't trying to affect. And that's why all prescription drugs come with a large number of pages called side effects. The most important understanding about this is these are not side effects. That's a euphemism. That's to make it say, oh yeah, this medicine was to cure A, and unfortunately it will kill you by doing B. But don't worry, that's a side effect. And the reality is, I'll have to just admit the truth, there is no side effect. Everything is a direct effect.
Pharmaceutical drugs override your body's systems. That's what they're designed to do. You have the real thing, when your body's finished using it, just keeps flushing it out. When you have a patented synthetic, it can't flush it out, so that synthetic keeps working and working and working long after you didn't need it anymore. And that's what brings about the side effects.
What we have found is that the violence that frequently shows up in the United States, like schoolroom shootings, like Columbine and many other shootings, almost every one of them has been precipitated by children who are on SSRI drugs and we're in the process of not taking them or getting off of them, because those drugs, the side effect is suicide, depression, and anger and rage. So basically, It's funny because I read an article about the pros and cons of giving children Prozac, and the first paragraph says it's a placebo. Now let's look at the positive and negative side, and I'm thinking the negative side is so disastrous that no one in their right mind who would know this relationship would ever give a child this drug. But I have to admit, being part of the industry for a number of years, the industry is driven by corporate interests, not science. Science is a pure driven field of pure philosophy and science and study. Corporate interests are how much money can I make? So we push the Prozac because the drug companies push the Prozac at the expense of the health of the children and people who take it.
There are a lot of things that we can do to help people before they reach for the Prozac.
But unfortunately, you know, we have been conditioned to expect from our doctor that bit of paper with a medication on it, a chemical. And I think we've got to be very careful that that medication isn't suppressing our feelings. If actually our feelings are at the roots of ourselves and our immune system, and very closely associated with our feelings, and that chronic illnesses may be due to feelings that haven't been expressed, we've got to be terribly careful that the medication that we're using isn't doing this very thing and suppressing those feelings.
I had a series of losses. I lost my home and my business. I had cancer, a couple of surgeries. I had 10 car accidents. My sister had AIDS, and the culmination of that was my partner of 20 years left. And I plummeted. For the first time in my life, I really plummeted. I had weathered the other storms quite well. And when I went to my doctor, she said, well, you know, this has been going on for some weeks now, and, you know, I really think you need to be on something. And I said to her, my first response was, well, actually, you know, no, I don't want to take anything. I've had an awful lot of losses. Help me deal with my grief.
I've had sisters that have been battling with mental illnesses, and I've seen them just chucked on all kinds of medications, and I've seen them so sedated. And I decided for myself, through seeing my sisters, that I'm sure that it had a lot to do with me getting my counselling and healing. I wanted to do that first, because, and if it was going to work, then I was going to roll with that. The thought of having a pill, to me, I knew it wouldn't be fixing anything. It would just be not only sedating me, but it would just be keeping me in a state where I'm not learning anything, where I'm not getting the real reasons of why everything is happening. And Lord knows what the pill was going to do in long-term effect to myself.
My son was born with mental and physical handicap, and it was undiagnosed, so it was quite an unknown area. So for about 3 or 4 months we were dealing with, you know, was he going to live, was he going to die, resuscitating him on a daily basis. So naturally life was traumatic. Doctors were wonderful, they were helpful, they were caring, but they were looking for a solution to me as well, not just to the son. And so about 3.5 months into it, they offered me some pills. Just one day they just said, you're sad, you're miserable, here's some pills that might make you feel better. Their intentions were good, but when I went home that night I was thinking, am I really supposed to feel better? I mean, my son is going to die, whether it's tomorrow or in 5 years, he's going to die. Maybe I'm supposed to feel the depression, and maybe I'm going to be better for him if I'm actually alert and feeling, even if it's crying. And I had worked with people who'd been on pills, and I knew that sometimes it suppresses your personality. And I thought, do I want my son to have a foggy, non-Dana holding him? Or do I want him to have a real, true, sad mother holding him who's loving him? And so I decided, no, I'm not going to take the pills. But a week later, I was really tired of being sad. You know, I wasn't happy, and I thought, well, just sitting in this place wasn't really working either. So I started thinking, what can I do? And action has always kind of been my thing. For me, whenever I feel low, just act somehow to get myself moving. So I found a treadmill that was in the staff room in the hospital that somebody told me that they'd give me the key. And I just started jogging in the morning and running, and I started noticing that I was feeling better, especially when I got past that 15 minutes. So from that point, everything's changed for me, where it's about finding things in your natural environment that feel good to you, that remind you that you have control and you have choices. What concerned me so much was that
They weren't discussing with me my options or even talking to me about why I might be feeling that and what may come out even out of the pills. It was just a quick fix, which really is not the answer to personal development.
There's been tons of people that have told me, hey, look, I've been depressed. All you need to do is just get on antidepressants. Lots of people. Some of them told me that I could be on it for a short time, for a long time. But I'm very lucky. I went to my doctor and I said to him, do I need to go on the meds? And he said to me, well, how do you feel? And at the time I had just begun counselling, which was which was part of my great discovery of letting go and undoing. And I said to him, well, look, I'm doing really well with this right now. I can feel a change in my well-being. And he said, well, carry on with this. And if it's working, stick with it. If it's not working, then we'll turn to the meds. So I was actually very lucky that I had a doctor that did not shove pills at me.
We bought a belief system that medicine knows, that they tell us what works, and then whatever the doctor says, the doctor is the boss, and we take these things without questioning. And it turns out it's time to question.
We're asking what is wrong, and when we ask that question, it implies what's wrong is going to stay wrong, and then we need to have a fix for it. So in so many situations, what's wrong seems to be a chemical imbalance, that the body's no longer producing some chemical, whether or not it's a digestive enzyme or it's a hormone that helps to regulate the menstrual cycle, or whether or not it's actually perhaps a chemical that affects mood in the brain. And when that diagnosis is made, like, let's ask what's wrong, oh, this is missing, that leads to the natural solution of, let's give you a medication to supplement that brokenness, that deficiency. But that presupposes that the body is never going to be capable of manufacturing that substance again. Now, what I like to ask is, what could be right?
What could I be doing differently? What is the gift in all of this? What can I learn today about my body that can assist me in my process of growth?
The question creates awareness and generates possibility, and from there we can choose.
So when it comes to the healing side of things, it's the same principle. If we want to, we can play a part. But we need to play a part not from a point of ignorance, but from a point of understanding how healing happens and how we can have an impact on our own, which actually means not always taking somebody's advice from the outside or popping some sort of pill or having some sort of treatment, because there is enough research on the planet today to show that that is not always necessary.
Being on medication is not right or wrong, it's individual choice. And you will know for you when and if the right time is that you want to come off medication. The key is to do it with support and do it safely, as many people will experience diarrhea, dizziness, panic attacks. So seek advice first on how to go about that.
With the rise of naturopathic medicine, we've almost gone way off on a tangent of popping pills that way. So we've gone from this popping a pill from pharmaceuticals into this pro-popping vitamins and nutrients, when really it's not about popping pills, it's about feeding the body what it needs.
Take a petri dish and take it from a healthy environment, put it in a bad environment, and cells get sick and die. Take your skin-covered petri dish, take it from a healthy environment, put it into a bad environment, your cells are going to get sick and have a disease or they're going to die. And then what we have done mistakenly is say, well, stay in the bad environment, adjust the chemistry. The new biology says, no, take yourself out of that bad environment, or your perception of that bad environment. Do not respond perceptually to that bad environment, and you will make different chemistry to the same stimulus.
That means you have to be greater than the conditions in your life, be greater than the environment. No longer allow the environment to control your thinking, but now to have your thinking and feeling begin to dictate your environment.
Even in the States, they recognize 90% of illness and office visits by doctors are due to a person's lifestyle. And you say, well, if that's true, wouldn't the mission of the medical profession to be to teach them, if your lifestyle's bad, then I should teach you how to have a better lifestyle?
As doctors, healers, nurses, therapists, life coaches, we are aware of our being and how powerful that is as another human being in this process. Not a dominant person, but as a connected person.
You know, there's a whole list of conditions that officially are incurable. And whether or not it's a psychological disorder or an autoimmune disorder, you know, autoimmune disorders are basically mostly classified as incurable. And when I can shut down my inner filter, my editor, my left brain saying, you know, I've read in the newspaper that it's not possible to cure that, then magic happens.
The healing process is pretty well always a heart-opening process, where we go back into almost the processes, a little microcosm of their life, where they come to us almost expecting us to be a parent, a caring parent, where we show compassion. And then through the process, where they then receive compassion, they learn that how to receive compassion in their lives as well. And so we first of all engage our hearts, and then we put our heads together, basically, how we're going to do this.
I toured with Patch Adams a few years back. We were compassionate clowns, and one of my best experiences of that was the Deaf, Dumb and Blind Institute in Moscow. Walking into the facility, had only come 3 or 4 doors into the room, and a little girl in a blue velvet dress came and took my hand and led me off to the side to another room, pulled me down and sat me on the floor and started playing with my earrings on my left ear. And I'm just present and waiting for getting a sense of what's going to happen, where is this going. And there was just this quiet moment of connectedness, but sensing, eager, waiting. And then she started to hum, and I could tell by the tonal quality of her voice that she was deaf. And she hummed for a time, and then she stopped, and she's still playing with my earrings. And I thought, oh, my turn. So I hummed. And she hummed, and I hummed for 45 minutes. And it's the only time in my life, for 45 minutes consistently, where I have had no other thoughts.
I found through meditation, I used to just think that they were a bunch of hippies, but in part of my self-discovery, I'll always remember my first meditation that I had. For the first time, as I sat there, I just thought, okay, I'm breathing, I'm listening to my breathing. I do notice my thoughts are stopping. Well, wait a minute, there's me thinking. Okay, just breathe. And so after a while, I think it was about an hour, I stopped, and for the first time in my 33 years, I heard no thoughts. No thoughts. And I felt like, even my room, I felt like I was seeing my room for the first time. I almost felt like I guess what happened was the true essence of me came on the outside, because it was like seeing everything for the first time, and I finally felt the silence and the presence and the peace. I understood that that's exactly what nature was.
Now is the only moment you can experience right now. Love is the highest state to exist in that now moment.
And we know that if the word love isn't used a lot in our early childhood, there's a higher instance in heart disease and blood pressure later on in life. We know if a child is abandoned, even though that abandonment may not be deliberate, that will lead to an increase of certain chemicals in the body. One is called C-reactive protein, and this is a marker of inflammation. So that marker of inflammation could lead to heart disease, and they've shown that for children who have felt abandoned. Okay? And of course, you know, a child cannot discriminate. It can't work out why it's being abandoned. Even we're talking about in the first year of life, and even there's evidence now that that extends to when the baby's in the womb as well. Now, I believe through awareness we can actually we can change this. We can change this by knowing about it. And it can't come just from our heads. It can't come from an academic training. It has to come from a compassionate heart. And then we add in our academic training to that.
As a child, growing up, it had to be one of the most hardest experiences, because there was no hope and there was no belief that I was actually somebody, that I wasn't told that I was smart, I wasn't told that I was beautiful. In fact, opposite, I was told that I wasn't beautiful. So, you know, when you turn to your parents or your family and that's the place where you're supposed to get your foundation, I didn't. So it's not till later when I realised of trying so many things that didn't work that I found within myself that through healing that I was the one that could heal myself, and if I was the one that could heal myself, then that meant that I was the one that could love myself. And that's when I discovered, so does that mean, I questioned to myself, does that mean that I could parent myself? And I thought, and so I gave it a go in little different ways, and that's when I really realised I actually hold everything within me that's been missing that I can actually give back to myself.
You cannot change what has happened in the past, but you can change how you choose to respond to it now. As an adult now, with all the resources that you have, you can embrace the love and the intelligence that you are.
The grown me now, I can tell the little Camellia inside that I love her very much and that I'm here for her and that I'm her advocate and that she can leave it all to me now, as opposed to how it was. I had no idea looking back that it was little Camellia leading her through such a turmoil time, trying to turn to substances and everything. I had no idea that it was the little hurt Camellia just trying to find her way. So it's really good to know now that I can hold the key and that I can parent her and that when she's loved in return, that we both work together.
So the deep healing process takes us almost back to our childhood, to an ideal childhood when our hearts are open and that we're being listened to and that we're being cared for. And then we learn to care for ourselves. And for some people this can happen very quickly, and others it may take a year or two. But ultimately it's the basis of healing, and it's heart-based, and it's compassion-based, and it's empathy-based, and that's where we should start.
I believe that the majority of physical healing does occur through emotional healing, which I feel is simply the opening of the heart. When you get the real lesson that's sitting inside the challenge that you're facing, crisis becomes a blessing, and suddenly a whole new set of possibilities opens up. As we're about to see, this is not only limited to the curing of mental illness, but also to cancers, tumours and other physical disease. We've been believing that these are genetically imprinted within us, but are they?
We've been giving genes powers of turning on and turning off. Oh, a cancer gene turned on, a cancer gene turned off, this gene turned on, and all of a sudden we see, oh my God, genes are making these decisions and turning on and off. We've said that for 50 years. But scientifically, that was never proven, and now it turns out to be totally false for a simple reason. A gene is a blueprint, just like a blueprint in an architect's office. It's a blueprint to make the protein building blocks, and those are the subunits that come together and make our body. So our bodies are proteins, and the traits and characters of our body are the traits and characters of proteins, and the proteins are created using blueprints called genes. Well, the important understanding about this, when I say a gene turns on, a gene turns off, I'm suggesting that blueprints have self-actualization. Blueprints make decisions. And I say, well, does that seem reasonable? So I go, let's go to an architect's office. Here's an architect, and the architect's working on a blueprint. I stand over her shoulder and I ask her, excuse me, the blueprint you're working on, is that on or off? And she looks at me and goes, like, what are you talking about? There's no on and off, it's a blueprint. I go, precisely. A gene is a blueprint. It has no on or off. It's either, like a blueprint, it's either red or not red. But the blueprint doesn't have an action. The blueprint doesn't make a decision. It has no power other than a blueprint. I mean, if we think genes work the way they do as blueprints, then that would give blueprints powers to regulate. If that was true, then an architect could take the blueprints, drive by a building site, throw the blueprints into the lot, drive away, and the structure will genetically assemble into the building. Well, we say that about the human, but it turns out it's all a misperception. It was completely misunderstood. We now know that there's a contractor that selects the blueprints and can modify the blueprints, that our contractor acts through a process, a mechanism called epigenetics. It controls which genes are read and how they are read. Now here's an exciting reality. Epigenetic mechanisms mean I can control the reading of the gene. By how? Through my perception of the environment. I read what I need in my mind, and my mind sends signals to my biology to adjust my genes to make my body match the needs of the world that I live in.
When we start learning and experiencing how we can adjust our internal programming, we realize not just at a cognitive level that genes are not in control of our biology, but we realize at an experiential level that we are in control of how we choose to express the genes of our biology.
When a child is adopted into a family that has cancer running in it, the adopted child will get the cancer with the same propensity as a natural genetic sibling, even though it came from totally different genetic stock. The propagation of the cancer wasn't genetic, it was behavioral. It's based on epigenetics. And then you say, well, what's the difference? And the difference is, if genes control your life, genetic control, the belief that we've been programmed with, I'm a victim. Why? I can't change the genes. But epigenetic control says, no, wait, my perception is adjusting and causing the reading of my genes. Then if I change my perception, I change my genetic readout, and the answer is yes. And all of a sudden it says, well, wait, genetics makes me a victim. Epigenetics gives me the opportunity to be the master.
I see a lot of people with cancer. I don't particularly like the term that the person is fighting cancer, and yet on our media we feel this every day. We are cancer survivors, we're losing our fight to cancer, which sometimes means that we're dying. I think these are all terms that I think are becoming outdated. And from my experience from treating with people with cancer is how they face their condition is unique to themselves, and how they heal is unique to themselves. And in fact, we should be focusing on the strength of the person and encouraging them to accept help often from loved ones, and us to play a role in that. Those things are far more important than a fight.
Dr. Dean Ornish, a cardiovascular physician in San Francisco, was working with cardiovascular patients, just like all other doctors do. And what he did is, like all other doctors, gave them the complete regimen of all the pharmaceutical drugs to maintain and keep them healthy as best they could with their cardiovascular disease. But he started working on this, and he realized he took a group of patients in an experiment that was published in a journal. And he said, rather than giving them chemicals and drugs, I'm going to teach them a better diet. I'm going to give them ways to deal with stress that are much better, teach them some meditation techniques, social skills, work on teaching them a different way of life. No drugs. The result, in the drug-treated group, which is conventional, if the drugs can stop the degeneration, that's called success. In the treatment group that Ornish worked with, no drugs, changed lifestyle, not only did the patient's degeneration stop, the patients regenerated their cardiovascular system. That doesn't happen in the pharmaceutical model. And the reason why that was important was, it was not chemistry, it was lifestyle.
If you do the treatment, your life may be extended to 6 months, and if not, you may only have 3 weeks. Very dangerous words. Do your research, because there is case after case after case of people who have decided against the treatment and instead changed lifestyle, and 15, 20 years later, after being diagnosed terminal, are living a healthy life.
We talk about somebody who's terminally ill, and everybody's counting this person out. Oh my God, they got cancer, they're gonna die. Look, they're dying here in the hospital bed. And then this person expresses what we call a spontaneous remission. And we say, well, what was that all about? Well, medicine can't really deal with it because there's nothing in the medical conventional textbooks to explain how can somebody be terminally ill with a cancer and then next day not have the cancer. Because in genetics, genes control, genes cause cancer, you die from cancer. But now we find out, guess what? When people have a spontaneous remission, it's because they had a profound belief change. And when they have that profound belief change, the belief change changes their physiology. And in the response to that physiological change, they actually, in the belief change, can change the readout of the gene and make it read normal again.
But once we've lived with the idea that certain conditions are hard or incurable, then we're not open to seeing miracles because we think we know everything.
the word illness perhaps is integral to experiencing wellness. And if we look at the word illness and draw it in capital letters, and then we just tag on a few short strokes right at the beginning, illness miraculously transforms and becomes wellness. Illness is not to be feared, is not to be resisted, is not to be fought, but to be embraced as an opportunity for growth and an opportunity to get us on the path, either to wellness or of wellness. And I think that's the real gift in illness.
One of the most important steps in shifting from illness to wellness is shifting our focus from our external environment to our internal environment.
The environment is very seductive. And of course you can accumulate more things, you could buy more things, you could do more things, but we reach a certain point in our life, in our late 30s and 40s, when you realize that none of that's going to make you feel better. And that, of course, is the midlife crisis. So what do? Do you go out and buy more things? Do you go out and drink? Do you go out and use drugs? Do you go out and gamble? Do you do pornography? Do you video game? What do people do? Anything outside of us to make that feeling go away immediately. And so the moment we can do something to make that emptiness or that fear or that anxiety go away or that depression go away, the moment we notice whatever we took or whatever we drank or whatever game we played or whatever we did, the moment we notice whatever it was out there that made us feel better, we're going to associate that change in feeling with that thing outside of us. The problem is, just like the video gaming, it's going to take more the next time you do it. A little more gambling, a little bit more shopping, a little bit more of a drug, because the receptor sites on the outside of the cells become desensitized. So it's going to take more of a rush of chemistry to turn them on. It's like living with a spouse that always yells at you. Over time, you don't hear them any longer, so they have to yell louder. And this is exactly how the receptor sites work. So people then become more and more unhappy because now they're relying on something outside of them.
I guess my most turmoil times were basically all around just trying to get further and further away from who I thought I was, which was something worthless. So that involved going to drugs, going to alcohol, all addictions, sexual addictions, drug addictions. And there was a part of me that wanted to be really tough and not to feel. And those things worked, but only for a while. I loved them, but in return I saw that I was getting no love from them. And it wasn't until I really reached my rock bottom that I realized this is not working, and it may have worked for a while, but you need to start all over again.
You hear people say things like, he makes me so angry. Well, you know, that's not possible. He can't possibly make you angry. You choose to be angry. He might do things that don't fit with your paradigm. However, it's a choice that you have made to be angry as based on what he did. And so many of us are blaming people and circumstances for who we are and how we feel. And that would mean that for you to feel better, you would have to send everyone in the world to the psychiatrist for you to feel better. And I don't think that would work.
No. The person who looks down at that emotion and says, I give up, I can't go on. I never loved you, I don't love myself, I can't go on agreeing any longer because I'm unhappy. And they begin to tell the truth. And they break all of their emotional agreements and contracts with everybody in their life that they used to feel suffering with, or they used to feel important with, or they used to complain with. They begin to stop all of that because it's no longer working, and they realize it's just, they're stuck. The moment they begin to look at that and they begin to tell the truth and they begin to surrender, that's the metamorphosis, that's the change now.
If we change our perceptions, we change our physiology. I'd rather change my perceptions than to take a drug and change my chemistry, which is then the lethal part.
Whilst natural therapies and medication have a different process, they're both still about treating illness. There needs to be a paradigm shift where it's not about treating illness, but about educating wellness, teaching the steps at a very young age to self-care, setting up belief structures about the body's innate ability to self-heal. It is not the doctor's or the therapist's responsibility. It is the responsibility of each and every one of us to ensure that we create growth, we maintain, and we heal our bodies.
Teaching the brain and body how to bring itself back to normal or recalibrate it is, I think, the future of mental health.
I know when I experienced stress, anxiety and burnout in my life that I was so busy building an army to fight my battles that I hadn't even stopped to take the time to consider that there might be an alternative way. I used to think that I have to fight my way through everything and fight my way through life with my fists up just in case something was to suddenly pop up and hurt me. What kind of a perception is that? I've learned through understanding the power of the mind that actually my outcomes in life are massively determined by the perceptions that I hold. So when you come to the crossroads in your life, which you will inevitably do at some point, what are you going to choose? Are you going to take the same old beaten track, the one that you've been 1,000 times before, being who you were yesterday, today, or are you going to take the new path, the road less traveled, which may look rocky and rough, but actually opens the door to a whole new set of learnings, new set of insights, and a refreshing perspective on life?
There are so many things that people can do. Natural therapies, for example, gosh, they have their own alphabet. CBT, EFT, NLP, DBT. But whatever you decide that you are going to do, the first step is making a decision that you are going to move in a different direction. And that secondly, that you are going to take action.
Action itself creates that feeling that you have options and control, okay? Depression is feeling that you have no control over your life, okay? So, for instance, I'll just use my son as an example. He didn't learn very well because of his mental and physical handicap. So if he was laying down on a blanket, we found it difficult to get him to learn to grasp his toys. The minute we got him a standing frame and got him upright, psychologically he was in a state to move. And so we would, within 2 days, he would be grasping a toy. Where laying on the ground is a state of inaction. So psychologically we would move, whether it's just going out and getting a pram and going for a walk, it's moving, and then we start thinking of forward movement. And when you're thinking forward and of your future and what you're going to do next, you're out of the victim state and into doing things for your life.
Depression doesn't live on the ceiling, so stand up, look up, get moving, and that will get your heart pumping.
So the heart has in fact 3 main functions. The one we know, it's pumping the blood and oxygen, CO2 and all these things. The second one is to create this electromagnetic field around. And another function also, the heart is a hormonal gland, so it produces a lot of hormones that affects also the brain and other function in the body. So the heart is a very, very complex organ that has a lot of actions everywhere, including our health, including our emotions and our mood. And so it's not only here, but emotion happens also here.
When people have an idea, they're passionate about it, or they come up with a creative idea. It's something that is heartfelt.
Jump into the mindset of a child again and dream without limitation.
Like children, they love to be outside, and you come in, in the evening, and you walk out to the porch and you yell, "Hey, come on guys, it's time to come in and eat." And they say, "I'm not hungry." And then you say, "Well, it's cold outside, come on in, put a jacket on." "I'm not cold." And then you say, okay, well, listen, you're filthy, you're dirty, look at you, come on in, take a bath." "I don't care." "Well, it's getting late, you gotta go to bed." "I'm not tired." In other words, they're so immersed in the experience, they're so in the present moment that they never want it to end. That is the state of creation. Adults, you say, "Hey, come on in, it's time to eat." They say, "All right, I'm coming right now. It's cold, all right, bring me something." We live in, such a contracted state that we're missing the moment a lot of time.
There are processes out there that allow you to become the director of your own movie, where you can edit the past and create your future at a whole new level of awareness.
The great thing that comes from being aware is I have a chance to grow and be enlightened. So after I write what I'm aware of, then I write pretty much what I'm discovering and what I'm learning from that. So I have my awareness, little paragraphs, and my enlightenment. So that's much better than writing and keeping myself an identity of the victim Camellia. What is the victim Camellia feeling today? No. What is Camellia aware of today?
Now, in a state of creation, when we're truly creating, when we're inspired about a vision, a dream, when we're thinking about possibility, when we're speculating on inventing something new, if we're doing it properly, as we begin to contemplate and reflect on a possibility, the whole chemistry of the brain changes. The hindbrain begins to cool off and the forebrain begins to turn on. And the forebrain is the executive. That's the seat of the you and the me. That's the boss of the brain.
When we access the frontal lobe and are focused on creating the future rather than dwelling on the past, all other parts of the brain come into alignment, and no longer are we operating out of the emotional part of the brain, but out of a higher level of consciousness, inner strength and power.
But for me, the most exciting people who testify of God's power are those that get into the state of religious ecstasy and say that God protects them to the extent that they drink strychnine in toxic doses with the belief that this poison will not affect me because God will protect me. So they're unshakable in that belief. And guess what? They drink the strychnine with absolutely no harmful effects. And the relevance is, well, how did that work? And the answer is, we are more powerful than we've ever been given credit for. That we have the power of our mind to control what we do with our biology. Walking across a bed of hot coals, fire, is a belief system. You don't believe you can walk across a fire, don't do it, because if you do, you're going to burn yourself. The ones that don't burn themselves are the ones that walk across with a total, unshakable belief that this is okay.
Go out and do things that are going to create an I can do it belief in yourself. Rock climb, abseil off the side of a building. If you've never been horse riding, jump on a horse, jump into life. Move through your perceived limitations.
So my point of view creates my reality. So how many points of view do I have, or do you have, that create your reality? And it's about just seeing those and making a demand to change them.
You know, the space up here in your mind is your space. So what are you going to choose to fill it with? And what you no longer want to have up there, empty it out. Let it go. You know, our brains have neuroplasticity, which means that we can prune away old connections and create new connections. So, you know, are you really going to argue for your limitations? Oh, you know, I've tried that before and it didn't work. Well, really? According to whom? Are you really going to allow your limitations of your past to prevent you and to limit you from creating your future? Let it go. Create a new reality.
When we deliver ourselves from our own limitations and we fall in love with who we're becoming, we're more prone to give. We're more prone to contribute. We're more prone to make a difference. We're more prone to decide how we are going to change the course of history.
We are our own world. We have everything within us. We are unlimited.
You're not a victim of your biology, you are a master of your biology, and with mastery, you will become empowered and change the world.
Looking outside me, trying to find who I am. Searching in others, please tell me who I am. Further away from me seem to work at first, till rock bottom found me. Only then within me I heard peace is within me, love's within me, hope is within me, all is within me, peace is within me, love's within me, hope is within
Every cell in the body is a vibration of energy, and food, which is made up of cells, live living food, is also a vibration of energy.
Diet, an alkalizing diet, basically fruits and veggies, and if you can go raw, every chance you get, raw veggies.
2 handfuls of cashew nuts a day gives you the equivalent dose of taking a Prozac. Again, we're in this mentality that fats are bad when this type of fat is good.
The best chocolate that supports both our health and our taste buds has 2 tablespoons of coconut oil, 2 tablespoons of cocoa or natural cacao ground up, 1 packet of pitted soaked dates, 1 jar of almond butter.
By feeding the body a healthy diet, sometimes that doesn't matter if the thinking's poison.
A lot of what we think is done at a subconscious level, so start bringing those thoughts up into your conscious awareness.
The first time I started to notice my inner thoughts, my inner dialogue, the best way that worked for me was to just write down anything that came in my head.
How do I no longer want to think? How do I no longer want to act today? How am I going to be different?
Because once again, all the teachers all down through the ages have always said, what you think about the most is what you become.
Feelings that are buried alive never die.
I discovered within myself that if I'm feeling this is for a reason. That's where the awareness comes into searching what is it within me. I'm aware that these feelings are here, and then I start asking questions, and that's where I become enlightened.
You know, it's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel sad. It is okay to feel nervous. Feelings are not about being suppressed and held on to. We need to acknowledge our feelings and release them.
Our bodies are made for moving. Our mind's made for thinking. Body's made for moving.
Being a mum, it's great to know that I could just dance in my room. Doesn't cost anything. Just put on my CD and dance.
Research is showing that people who are active to the point that they are stimulating their muscles as well as their heart and lungs just to increase them a bit each day are proving more productive at work, having more successful relationships, and saying that they're happy.
We are anchored to our environment, so our environment needs to be supportive to us.
Disorder can cause disharmony in the way that we feel.
You know, sometimes it's as easy as adjusting your perception to your environment or just getting out. But I realise that for some people that are in a violent environment, sometimes it's not as easy as just getting up and walking out. But know that there are options.
The spiritual path of self is basically where you come into the conscious awareness of the present moment. You become consciously aware of being present.
One thing the breath does, especially if we breathe like a baby does, down to our tummy, is that we take a focus away from the spinning brain into a state of being.
There is nothing to seek in life. It is just a case of remembering who you are. And who you are is unconditional love. And that love resides in the space in between your thoughts. It is a place where energy just flows. It is a place that has no language. It is a place that is not doing, but rather being.